Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Marc Kate.
And I'm Chadlot.
This is episode 118. We're going to be talking about Rear Window, the Alfred Hitchcock film from 1954. You can email us at whatthe@scarythoughts.org. And I think neither of us have anything to plug.
Nope, not unless you need case studies written for a giant corporation.
I am almost done with school, so we might actually be able to do this more often again.
That will be cool.
Apologies that we've been so infrequent. You moved away. School started really burying me. But here we are.
Word.
And I guess I'll start off by saying, I don't know if I shared this with you, but I sort of realized at some point recently, like, oh, I've never seen Disturbia. And I sort of remember that was supposed to be a good movie.
I've never seen Disturbia
Maybe
either.
we can cover it. Shia LaBeouf, thriller. I think it was 90s, maybe early aughts. I'm forgetting now. But like I watched it. It's fucking garbage. It is just shit filmmaking. And it's a ripoff of Rear Window. And so I just thought, let's just do Rear Window because it's legitimately amazing. And I just watched it like maybe 3 years ago.
Is Disturbia similar to Rear?
It's the same plot.
Explicitly. Okay.
It's explicitly. He plays a guy who is ankle monitored in his home. And so he just stares out the window and he's convinced he sees that his neighbor is a serial killer.
Huh.
And mayhem.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredibly disappointing because the premise is not so bad. But yeah, Rear Window.
Yep.
We've never covered Hitchcock, have we?
No, this is the first Hitchcock. I've had a Hitchcock book on my shelf since the early days of starting the podcast.
Did you read it?
Years ago.
Okay,
I don't know
cool.
where it is. I have no idea where it is. I
Okay.
was trying to look back at it again, but there are no shortage of books about Hitchcock, and there are no shortage of books about this movie.
Yeah.
I mean, there is probably a near infinite amount of undergrad film papers written about this movie. And in fact, the first and only time I saw this movie was in 1996 when I was a film student at University of New Orleans for one semester. It was kind of like the most basic bitch film class ever, but it was kind of awesome. We did Citizen Kane, Taxi Driver, Rear Window, maybe Gone with the Wind. No. We did Wizard of Oz and
Sound of Music?
No, like just, the sort of like canon of good film, like the sort of stuff that like if you were serious about film and worked in a movie theater in the 90s, like it's that sort of class. And it was kind of fun too because like anyone could come watch the movies. So my friends would come and we would watch the movie. It was like basically like free movies, which was kind of cool at the time.
Great.
But it was definitely a lot of the papers were like the meaning of the colors of each room.
Yeah.
Or like, which is, it's always interesting, like that analysis is always out there, but nobody really talks about it. Like you can't really find Hitchcock talking about intentionally making a dress green. And it was one of the things that always really confused me about film school was there would be conversations about these interpretations of things of like I wrote this paper about like what, the metaphor of the giant fireplace in Citizen Kane and like just pure speculation, like I still have never really been able to find like hardcore textual like justifications for that sort of thing.
Yeah. But I think that the thing you're pointing to is why this film is so beloved and so analyzed. And I don't want to speak disparagingly of the film, and I don't want to speak disparagingly of people who are excited to dissect this film, which we're about to do. But this movie, more than I would say most of the films you just listed on the canon, lends itself to that.
Yeah,
because there is all the symbolism that is, regardless of how we want to decide how purposeful it is, what the intentions are, this movie is rife with it.
Yeah.
How each of the neighbors and their domestic spaces function, it all weaves in and out of. It's sort of like before we had the relentlessness of MCU Easter eggs, we had things like Rear Window having all of these devices that you could discover and tie all together.
Well, he's like such an intentional filmmaker. Like everything, it's not like Dogma 95 and you point a camera down the road and there's a cat and well, there just happened to be a cat there. Like I think that's like a real product of like post 90s filmmaking is that sort of deal.
Yeah.
Whereas, like every sound in this movie is completely intentional. Every positioning of the movie or camera is like completely intentional. Even weird stuff like I read that the main character's window that he's actually looking out is like specifically the aspect ratio of the wide screen.
Well, it's the first thing you see is you just see his window and it's the same shape and dimensions as the screen you're watching. And it opens with the curtains being opened, the blinds being opened.
And it closes with them closing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many neat like little tricks that are just seem to be very like, unlike David Lynch, how you'll never find out what was going on. Like it seems like in conversation, Hitchcock will say something like, the reason why the camera is at James Stewart's eye level all the time and he doesn't move is to mirror the effect of being the audience watching the film. Yes. Like all that stuff is like pretty well documented, which I think is interesting I think that's what makes analysis of this movie in particular so enjoyable is you can kind of check that stuff and it checks out.
Right.
Like nobody who has ever had a theory of like what the ear at the beginning of Blue Velvet means has ever been correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's sort of, well, there I think you're speaking to the sort of like the joy of surrealism.
Yeah.
Versus artists who deal in predetermined symbols. But a thing we were just talking about that I think is another thing that's really delightful about this film is it's sort of like where's my brain? Inception.
Mm-hmm.
What's the director?
Christopher Nolan.
Yeah. It's a very commonly discussed thing. Like Inception is about filmmaking and each of the characters represents someone on a film crew and here's what positions they have. And it's all about creating worlds. It's about cinema. We can say the same thing about The Prestige. Not as easily as Inception, but it's certainly there. This is about the act of filmmaking, certainly about the act of creation. And this film does the same thing. It's a film that is not overtly, but basically about cinema.
Yeah, to me, it's the difference between like just making content and having style. Like there's a bunch of writers, like people write all kinds of shit. There's all kinds of books, but very few people have like a prose style that makes them a perennial talent. And I think Hitchcock, especially this film, has that. There's just so much going on that it's like by the books, cool, good filmmaking. It's funny you brought up Christopher Nolan because that's like, you're like, you always say scare quotes, good filmmaking, like kind of, but this is literally like how many people would probably say that Rear Window was their like college, of learning how to be a filmmaker. Like there's so many things you could like look at and see what were done like with this film and then probably understand how to make a better film with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of that, I think, is about the control that you were saying earlier, is that there are obviously incredibly talented people involved in this film, but they're also, it wasn't even shot on location. And, Hollywood movies are mostly shot on sets.
Yeah.
So it's not particularly special. Sitcoms are shot on sets.
Yeah.
But the degree to which Hitchcock had that set built to all these complicated specs that really inform every aspect of what you're about to see is really fascinating.
Yeah, like all the fire escapes, all the drainage spouts, anything that is metal, like in real life.
And a lot of them work. Well, the fire escapes had to work.
Yeah.
I think I read somewhere that Miss Torso was actually living on the set for a while because it was cheaper.
It doesn't make any sense to me, but I do know, like, you can see the plans for the set. Like, it's pretty interesting. And like, I think about like 6 to 8 of the apartments had like plumbing and stuff. Like they were just made like that. And then the real, I think, technical achievement, I mean, it's probably not that crazy, but like the clouds are made out of spun fiberglass, which is super, super toxic.
Yeah.
But that's why that sky looks really good. And it like sometimes you look at it and you're like, this is like, obviously it's so staged, but at the same time, like sometimes there's elements in the lighting that look real.
Yeah. Yeah. Helicopter, not so great looking.
No, I saw like a little clip of Tarantino talking about how he thinks like Hitchcock's third acts suck. And I think you could say that I think the ending of this movie is quite trash considering like how good, like I would say it's A+ all the way. And then everything from the guy putting his hands on James Stewart at the end on, I'd say everything from the camera flash on is fucking terrible.
I would say, let's get into that later. Maybe let's do the end later because I partially agree, but maybe just sticking on the set for a minute longer if we could. Another thing that I think is great is, so you're stuck like he is stuck. You are an audience member stuck in a theater, just as Jimmy Stewart is stuck in his chair and has this very limited view, this sort of panoramic, this sort of like panopticon type view that is only broken in the last act, except for this little sliver of alley where you see the street.
Yeah.
And it's almost like an exception that proves the rule. It's like the fact that you only see so much street almost makes it feel like more claustrophobic than if you never saw the street. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And it reminds
you that you're trapped by seeing this off in the far distance, these people walking back and forth.
Yeah, I read this book. I'll have to, maybe I'll put it in like the show notes or something like that, but it's the book's called Hitchcock's Rear Window, the well-made film. And it's just all about this particular movie. And one of the things that it mentions, which seems so cool and creepy to me, is that really, other than like, nobody really leaves the set other than the salesman, because it's kind of part of the plot or whatever. But when Miss Lonely Hearts goes to dinner, she only gets to the restaurant across and she's sort of sucked back in.
Yeah.
And so it has this sort of like purgatorial vibe where like you really can't get out of the courtyard of this area. The universe literally ends on the edges of it, which has a very like Tempest feel to me.
Yeah. Oh, it's cool. I like that a lot. Something I also like about the legacy of this movie outside of cinema is that it's sort of a trope in general of like, you have one piece of information and determine that there's a conspiracy and that, you see one thing and you decide this person's a murderer. And that I have a hard time not quickly leaping to how we live in a political moment where that is pretty rife. The one drop of poison rule about political affiliation and association, and how I'm not going to go very far down this road, I promise, but like how, for example, cancel culture operates. Like this person liked this person's tweet, and that person is a known associate of this person, therefore this person is cancelable. There's this sort of like, I see one little slice, and the implication is I decide that this person has murdered his wife.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, at the time, like when this came out, McCarthyism is in full swing. And there was some writing at the time that was like, oh, this movie's about McCarthyism. But it doesn't totally work for me, because the idea is that you should mind your own business and that to be nosy is sort of a bad thing. But I think like what happens in the film, they're right. He has literally killed his wife. So their intervention, stops this murderer. There's also the very beginning of the film when they talk about like how nobody knows. I think the nurse is going on this thing about how like nobody knows their neighbors and what sort of world is this or whatever. It's like, as long as he doesn't interact with anything past his window. He just like kind of looks on, which is this is the constant, the theme of Hitchcock, which is voyeurism. But like, I don't think to me, like maybe at the time it hit different, but I just don't get the McCarthyism thing, mostly because the voyeurism and the intervention by his character is like warranted, I think.
Is it warranted, or is he just randomly by chance right? Like, I feel like he won the conspiracy lottery.
Yes. I mean, it is a thriller, so you sort of like, that's the whole deal. But
I feel like the morality, not of the movie, just of him, is he should mind his own fucking business. I mean, I feel like that's how rule of law in countries that aren't mob justice like America function. Yeah, your suspicions don't mean shit, and we have to have a way of deciding collectively that it's beyond a reasonable doubt, not your suspicions. And it is interesting that he doesn't actually get directly very involved. He does get a little involved later by placing phone calls, but he instigates others to do his bidding, and he riles them up. And I think this is kind of connected to, going into symbolism here again, but his impotence. There are a couple of symbolic gestures towards him actually being impotent that I think are funny.
It's very Hemingway. Like, it's totally like Sun Also Rises.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I literally have a tab open to buy that book because I've never read it. Yeah. Okay. That, but like, yeah, he's helpless, and that's a short distance to symbolic impotence, but yeah, he has to get other people to sort of like, he can't get the cops, so he gets his girlfriend, so he gets his housekeeper.
Well, so he doesn't get any of them. Like, this is one of the things I think is really interesting about this movie is the nurse and Lisa, Grace Kelly's character, they are like involved in it in the way that like modern women are involved in murder mystery. Like, they get involved, and they basically, and like Lisa cracks the case because of her understanding of how women, like, it's so funny to think about now, like how women would behave, but like that's kind of how it, but also like I think she's probably pretty right, like there's like certain things like you wouldn't just throw all your chains and jewelry in your purse. They're just things that like people wouldn't do.
Wait, it just occurred to me that that's kind of Legally Blonde too.
It's exactly Legally Blonde.
Holy shit.
It's the same, and it's like actually like by having a sort of traditional normie perspective, she has like a truer view of the world than somebody with some sort of like Pizzagate weird view of the world would. And I think it's like, I think she's a great character because, and another difference between James, L.B. Jeffries, his character's name is L.B. Jeffries, and Lisa is that she's a part of New York and he's not. He's just there for a minute. Like, he went to war and, took the photos in the plane that like got him all famous. And then it's almost like an Anthony Bourdain thing where he's just like, his life is out there in the world, but it's also not really out in the world because he doesn't have any connections. Whereas she understands how New York works because she's like a socialite and she's in it, and she's actually quite adventurous. Like her arc is like she, like when she's climbing up the fire escape and all that stuff, and like staying over at his house at night and like sneaking in with like the police. Is it police? Yeah,
sure. Yeah, sure. I do also love the switch at the end that sort of feels like you could read it as like, Hitchcock, he's such a misogynist. I think it's fucking brilliant where it's a happy ending because she's going to be up for adventure. But of course, he's in two casts. He may never walk again. Actually, I read somewhere someone pointing out that 1950s medical at his age.
Yeah, he's got them Forrest Gump legs for sure.
But she's reading some sort of like Adventures in the Aztec Mountains or something like that. Yes.
Yeah.
And then I think as soon as he turns away, she like picks her fashion magazine back up.
Yeah.
Which I think is great because it's almost like she doesn't have anything to prove.
Yeah.
Right. He's sort of got this machismo forward thing driving him. And I'm not saying it's inauthentic, but it's definitely a performance. Whereas her adventurousness just sort of comes out. She's just doing her thing. Right. Like her inquisitiveness drove her.
Yeah. His read and like a read on him and like adjacent to that's kind of interesting is like, okay, at the time, 1955, he's a vet. He's a World War II vet. And so that has a certain sort of like, like his inability to reintegrate into the world is like, would be clearly PTSD. You know what I mean? Like he's still going and doing super dangerous shit in the way that like our modern like GWAT guys do. Like these dudes that go like, you shoot Bin Laden in the face and now you're into wingsuits. Like that sort of like path for people. Or like you do 1 million pull-ups like Goggins or whatever. But now, like if you were somebody who had like no historical knowledge, he would almost read like a man-child. In a weird way. Like he doesn't want to grow up. He doesn't want to commit to this beautiful woman. He doesn't want to make a life with her.
Yeah.
I wonder how people react to that now. But all of what happened to him, the exposition by objects in his apartment, I think is so good. Like you kind of get like how he, like the camera smashed and it goes up to the amazing photograph of the car exploding into him and stuff.
And then pans to that he clearly took the cover photo of her for like Life magazine or something.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess it's implied that's where they met. which is cute. I think that the filter of looking at something in history is really interesting because my visceral reaction to this movie when thinking about their relationship is that he is fucking grotesque. She is delightful. Fuck that guy. She can do better.
I feel like everybody who knew me and my wife in the olden days would have that opinion.
And I don't think that that's necessarily so very wrong, but I also recognize that not being from that era, there's probably something lost on me about what might, if this was a real couple. Okay, if this was a real couple, what's the connection, right? I don't get it. When he says I don't remember the dialogue, but we're two different people. We're from two different worlds, whatever. He's right. His other reasons for turning her down are disordered thinking, but that is correct. And I think that's part of the disconnect of like, yeah, what does she see in him? What are they doing together? What do they have in common? What do they talk about?
Yeah.
They're going to have a family. Like what's going on? What's the point of this relationship? And I wonder if we were watching this in the 50s, if it's obvious,
right?
If what the connection between these two types of people would be implicitly obvious. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out like where it's explicitly mentioned that she's rich. Yes. Like she's wealthy.
She pretends that she's not. Sorry, if I may, real quick. There's this thing that I haven't heard anybody talk about, but she takes pride in that she knows how to cook. For a woman in the 50s to take pride in knowing how to cook proves that they're so rich that it's an anomaly.
Right. It's like something that her like nanny taught her for goof or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like if you're a woman in the 50s, of course you know how to cook. All women in America in the 50s knew how to cook. If you're like, I cook for myself, like, oh, wow, good for you. Like, what a noble pursuit.
And also like she arrives with like the lobster dinner from, with a captain in the full uniform and stuff like that. So like, I mean, she is like a great girlfriend, pretty amazing.
No, she's awesome.
Yeah. And then, but in one of the other things that you'll see written about quite a bit is that each of the apartments represents a different sort of like direction that their relationship could have gone.
Which I love.
I think it's it seems very intentional. It seems it's on screen for sure. And all the color theory with the film sort of backs it up. Where it's like, one of the notable ones is that Miss Lonely Hearts is often wearing green, which some people say means she's envious of love or whatever. And then when Lisa does get kind of salty about their relationship, she's wearing a green dress, which sort of like visually ties her to that. And then, when he's talking about how difficult she'd have it, like how are you going to survive on a C-34 plane, freezing your balls off with one suitcase and all this shit. And then pretty close to that moment, he's seeing the woman in bed, the invalid woman that gets murdered. Like she kind of looks like her, like they have the same blonde haircut and stuff like that. And I don't know, a lot of that stuff's interesting. I always wonder, like, at what point in the writing of the film do you start thinking about that stuff? Is that just something that the art department figures out later for you? Or are you, because I mean, one thing like Wes Anderson's scripts, which I've read a few of them are extremely detailed about that sort of thing. And then I know like Hitchcock is clearly an influence on him. So I've never seen the Hitchcock scripts. So I'd be curious, like, where that comes in.
I also do like that this is a happy ending for our couple.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a little
ending for everybody.
Is it? But it's a happy ending for everybody. Miss Lonely Hearts hooks up with the musician. The army guy comes home for Miss Torso.
Yeah.
New puppy. It's great. Everybody's happy.
The temperature has literally come down.
Oh, I didn't clock that.
Yeah, because that's one of the things I think is really interesting is everything that happens sort of it makes logical sense. Like, why are all these windows open? Oh, it's 100 degrees out.
Yeah.
So like it sort of sets the stage for like why this is a possibility.
Yes.
And then, at the very end, it's like in the 70s or whatever. And so everybody's having it's probably New York fall or whatever.
Yeah. Wait, the 70s? What?
Like the temperature's in the 70s. So there's a there's a shot of the thermometer
at the beginning.
And at the end.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, what else?
There's so many gags in this movie. You know, Hitchcock's famously a fan of the pun, and the first thing I ever like got into Hitchcock was Hitchcock Presents,
Yeah.
which used to be on Nick at Night.
Okay.
And so I remember as a little kid watching and I was probably a little too young to understand what was going on in the actual episodes, but I loved Alfred Hitchcock himself. Like I was such a fan of him as like a crypt keeper type character, and he was funny. You know, and there was just something like really like interesting about him, and I think that his humor really plays into this. Like the whole thing of like lowering the dog down is such a Charlie Brown sort of deal.
Yes. And pretty much everything that comes out of Stella Thelma Ritter, is that her name?
Thelma Ritter, yeah.
One of the best side character actor roles ever.
She's great, and she's like a Cassandra character because she says at the very beginning of the film literally everything that's going to happen.
You're right.
Yeah, and he's like, what do you know, lady? Yeah. I think there's like, speaking of the what do you know, lady thing, I think one of the things that's written about Hitchcock quite a bit these days in our like, you know, our post BPD bang academic environment is, you know, Hitchcock's so alleged misogyny. I don't think is on display here, except in the affirmation of like traditional gender roles, which I think is fine for this era.
Yeah.
You know, like I think it's like the female characters in this movie, it really is all about them, I think, because they have the most agency, they have the most exciting shit to do.
Yes, and none of the women are as bad as the two main men. Well, the cop kind of sucks too, but Jimmy Stewart's character is, and the killer is a killer. Yeah. And then even, you know, Miss Torso, like, you know, we don't think of things so much in these terms anymore, but in the era, in the era was made, like her husband comes home and he's this kind of short, chubby, bespectacled.
Short king.
Yeah. And like, awesome.
I think it's great. Like, I think it's so funny. He's come back like from what I imagine would be the Korea War.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's just like a mess.
Yeah.
And then she's stoked.
She's so happy to see him.
Yeah. Her dancing in the beginning, I read that Hitchcock like intentionally was like, we're not getting a choreographer. And he's like, I just want you to dance like you would dance, because he wanted it to feel more like how you would dance when no one was looking, kind of deal. And it made, one of the things I noticed is like how modern her dancing felt when she's just being herself or whatever. There's the one or two scenes where she's picked up by another dancer and they're like practicing or whatever, but her whole like movements and like the butt shot, which is like kind of like risque for the time. I was like, oh, this is wild. Like how that would be in here. It's like, who would have thought, you know?
Yeah.
You know, especially in it, like the Hays Act is like a big thing at this point, you know?
Right.
Tarantino made a really interesting point about how he thought that if Hitchcock had been his age in the 70s, all of his films would have been better, because the violence that would have like the violence at the end of this film, for example, could have been done in a more like credible way. Right? And instead it's sort of like it's sort of goofy and very like unrealistic.
Right. No, that's interesting.
I mean, not that this film's super realistic or anything like that, but
should we talk about the third act then?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that part of the trouble for me is that this movie is incredibly meticulous and the killer is incredibly meticulous.
Yeah.
And then he stumbles over to Jeff's apartment to go murder him.
Yeah.
It takes him a long time. He shouldn't assume that Jeff is alone in this, that like nobody else knows.
Yeah.
So it's a really dumb, impulsive thing that he does that's kind of hard to buy.
Yeah, and the cops have already been at his house.
Yeah.
You know, so at that point, like really the best move is to skip town and rely on the fact that there's no computers in the 50s and you can just start a new life, you know? So it's like the movie, I don't want to say it's like, it's definitely not realistic, but it obeys like its own logic. You know, like things happen for reasons, but the way he behaves at the end seems unreasonable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Including, and I think it's significant, that he gets fooled by a flashbulb 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
That just went on too long.
Yeah. I was thinking about that. I was like, there's no way I couldn't have closed the distance between the door and him in that wheelchair and the time it took him to like switch out the flash bulb.
Yeah.
You know,
it's like
just,
like it would flash and he would stop, rub his eyes for a little while,
yeah.
like make some popcorn, take another step.
Yeah. One of the funny little little IMDb trivia things I read was that like they were going to have it be like whited out, but I guess Hitchcock like tried to blind people for real just to see what it looked like. And they all said it turned orange, which is why it's orange at the very end. So it's actually
okay.
intended to be a little bit more realistic, but it looks weird on the screen. And right when the cops are like coming across to save him, like the film speeds up. It has that like Jack Benny thing. It's just, there's just weird choices. Yeah. Benny Hill, yeah. It has like these just weird choices at the end that don't make a lot of sense. Also, he's like a story up. It's not going to kill him. You're going to throw him out the window like a story up. Like, what are we doing here? It doesn't make any sense. Before that, though, I think one of the best scenes, because it's like classic Hitchcock tension, is when Lisa goes into the house. Like that whole thing. And probably the most fun is when she has the wedding ring on and she's like wiggling the wedding ring. And then the salesman murderer, he sees it and then looks across. And like when he looks across, there's an interview or a little piece of Bill Hader talking about showing this movie to his kids and how they were like totally not into it at the beginning. They were like, "Ugh, what is this old shit?" It's like 75 years old. But the moment he looks at the screen, he says his kid screamed. And I think that's such a neat like effect to have on like an 11-year-old girl in this day and age, like to be like, "Oh my God." But there's also the neat thing of like her wiggling the ring is sort of like a proposal. Like she's sort of it's sort of like
God
she's like, "Oh, you didn't think I was adventurous. Now it's your excuse."
There's another. Oh, that's great. I never caught that.
It's funny. Like I wish I could find whatever I had to write about this movie in the 90s, because I think I probably would have been very focused on the set design more than anything else. And now what really plays for me is the relationship.
Yeah.
Specifically, because I have like you and I both have like pretty like strong wives, and so a character like that I think is very appealing.
Yeah. So often at the end of our episodes you often have like a weird question.
Yeah,
I actually have one.
Oh, good. Turning things around.
First time ever, maybe. Okay, so at the end of the movie he's got 2 broken legs.
I would try to sleep with Lisa and Miss Torso if I would have them.
It's not where I was going, but okay. No, I was. So, the movie starts, he has a broken leg and everything unfurls. And then at the end of the movie, he has 2 broken legs, which sort of infers Rear Window 2.
Yeah.
It ups the ante.
Yeah.
So it's Rear Window 2 :
The Lookening? I don't know. I didn't think about it.
Okay.
This movie just doesn't lend itself to that to me for some reason. I don't know. If you had to live in one of the apartments, which apartment would you want to live in?
The musician has a nice apartment.
Yeah.
It's kind of big and spacious and has the big window. There's something delightful about the couple that just sleeps on the fire escape.
So funny.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't want the street level apartment.
No, I think it's interesting too.
I mean, his apartment is great.
Yeah, his apartment's great. Like, I mean, this is like the Greenwich Village of the beat poets.
Yeah.
Like this is like I think in American history, like this place is it's like one of those like apex cool times, like in the way that, Studio 54 would have been, or even like LA at certain points.
Yeah, it's so much of what is amazing about New York before. I mean, New York has cool. Like every era is cool in a different way. Mm-hmm. But shortly after this, like not long after this, it's still pretty amazing, but it's when it starts getting like incredibly fucking dangerous.
Yeah.
Some of the best culture, writing, music, painting, performance art was happening not far from there, not long after there, but people were getting stabbed and shot and ODing, and like it got really gnarly.
Yeah, New York too, like it seems like the hippie thing wasn't exactly great for New York. It doesn't seem like it had, like, I think to me, probably the period of time in New York I'm most interested in is like late 70s sort of stuff. Like all of it. It doesn't even matter what it is, but late 70s New York. And like, I don't really think so much of like the 60s being, I know there was obviously the Velvet Underground and all that stuff happened there. Burroughs was there for a period of time, Ginsberg too, but I don't think of 1960s New York in the way I think of like 1960s California.
Yeah. Well, Peace and Love was a good match for London and San Francisco. It didn't lend itself to New York.
Yeah.
Not the same way.
I think it would have been so cool to like go back and just experience this time period. Like one of the things that's so fun about watching this film is just the stuff, like the ashtrays and their lighters and things like that, or even the goofy cameras. The one thing you mentioned earlier, the detective buddy, that's a character that seemed really like brassy for this role. Like I totally did. Like I didn't quite understand like the relationship. Like they're war buddies, right? So that implies a certain amount of like.
There's a bond can't be broken in a way. Yeah.
And like they're still close enough to where he'll come do cop stuff for his buddy,
Yeah. Even if it pisses him off and he finds it annoying.
Yeah. He finds it annoying, but it's like it's his buddy.
Yeah.
His sort of like read, he seems almost like he's like trying to bust her for being in the house at one point, like that whole scene seems really weird. They there's a line in the dialogue that probably is like, would be lost to history for a lot of people where it's like, oh, wouldn't it be something that the landlady found out? And that was a thing where you couldn't have your girlfriend stay overnight in certain bachelor pads. It was just like against the law. But it's just weird. Like probably most people wouldn't catch that as a line.
Yeah. Yeah. He had another line that was kind of parallel to that too. And I wonder if it's kind of speaking to the social conservatism of cops.
Yeah.
Maybe he's got a cop buddy. Cop buddy's judgmental and hates sex, but loves staring at titties across the yard. But if it gets too close, he's got to wag his finger. You know?
I was trying to like find out like what like maybe Hitchcock's position on that would be, because I know that there's like interviews where Hitchcock sort of had this idea that like in every window there's perversion. Like it was basically like everybody's a pervert if you point the camera in their window. And it's almost like I wonder what his relationship with like the state was. Like, because this is a representative of the state. So it's like, I mean, obviously he's a filmmaker and there's rules against him being able to like have his vision, at the time.
He's probably disappointed there's laws against him hitting actresses.
I mean, how are you going to get the best work out of them otherwise? I mean, it's impossible.
I'm not a filmmaker. I wouldn't know.
Yeah. I mean, like even Tarantino had to crash a car with what's her name in it.
I don't want to be associated with this conversation.
The other thing that's weird about that cop character is he has like Muad'Dib blue eyes. Like it's crazy how blue that actor's eyes is on the screen.
Oh no, I did. Everybody in this film.
Yeah, everybody has like.
It's weird.
I'm reading this this kind of like children's dragon novel that was like a kind of classic children's book from the 50s called Travel Light. Really pretty unknown now, but one of the lines in it is the princess had blonde hair and blue eyes, just like all good princesses should. I was thinking about how that would just not play now at all.
Yeah.
But then I think about how coded in it is into me is like, I think Grace Kelly is about as beautiful as it gets. And I even to like a modern copy of her, like I thought January Jones in Mad Men was absolutely gorgeous, and they explicitly make her to be a Grace Jones character, and they comment on it in the show.
Grace Kelly.
I know. Do I keep calling her Grace Jones?
I think maybe just once.
Oh, okay, yeah. I've been thinking about Grace Jones all day.
We all think about her all the time.
Yeah, I was thinking about how for sure the first time I ever saw Grace Jones was in the Conan movie.
Yeah,
and it's like I remember just being like immediately attracted to her, and just thinking about how cool, like, say what you want about John Milius, but he has like, I think maybe at the time the most powerful black female character on screen ever. It's like kind of interesting.
Certainly in a major film.
Yeah, in a major film. Yeah. But I'm sure there's something I'm not thinking of.
There's some blaxploitation,
or not. There's probably just something I'm just offensively not remembering. Mm-hmm. But that, I mean, a lot of like film commentary, I think, to the Pauline Kael model is memoir sort of, and so for sure that was the first time I saw it. So that's why I think about it.
Yeah, it is interesting that at that time, whatever the primary film stock that was being used in a lot of Hollywood movies, I don't know, like Eastman, Technicolor, whatever it was, just make blue eyes just shatter the lens,
Yeah.
when you watch a movie now and someone has eyes that are that fiery blue, it's pretty much a given that they've been bumped. The eyes have been bumped.
Yeah.
Back then, that didn't you couldn't do that. But the film stock could lend itself to that.
It's funny to like think about, you know how there's all this commentary about like, oh, we're over having a blue-eyed Jesus.
Yeah.
You'll hear that as a thing. When you go around churches, there just really aren't blue-eyed Jesuses. Like they're like a couple places in the South or whatever. But what people are thinking of is that movie, that like 50s Technicolor Jesus movie, and his eyes are blazing off the screen. And it makes me think it's just a consequence of film stock that we have this as part of our conversation now.
It might be.
I know this movie had a pretty heavy duty like color correction done to it, I think in the 2000s, something like that. I guess like it was one of the things that's so interesting in me about film, like film, is that like you could lose whole movies.
Yeah.
Or a movie could become so degraded over time that like people now are not seeing the movie that they saw then, which I think is pretty interesting.
Well, it's funny because even though cinema is something that exists in the age of mechanical reproduction, a Rodin sculpture is going to be very likely exactly the same in 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Especially considering, unless there is an apocalypse, those statues will be preserved very well.
Yeah.
Film doesn't work that way. And so even though they're reproduced, it is not a digital copy of a copy of a copy.
Right.
And they are degrading. And so what happens is part of the process of preserving cinema and music, just archiving, it includes interpretation. This exists when you restore frescoes. And sorry, it's impossible for me not to immediately think of that.
The Jesus?
Yes.
That the lady painted?
Yes. It's just... but it's an example of exactly what I'm saying.
It's exactly what it is, yeah.
It's an interpretation of preservation. And, you know, when the first wave of remastering in music happened, all of those remasters sound like ass. They're fucking terrible. Garbage.
Yeah.
So there was this entire moment where a lot of the, quote, most important music in history got shredded by a misunderstanding of what sounds good because everybody was into the technology. And sometimes it's correction, right? So we have remastered from scratch a lot of what was already remastered because it was shitty. So now it's like preserving the depth of the original recordings, but making it more robust.
I can think of one improvement, which is there's a version online you used to be able to find it. I'm sure they sued it off the internet, but somebody remastered And Justice for All, the Metallica album, with the bass in it.
Yes.
And it sounds better.
Right.
Yeah. But that's the only one I can think of.
And that's an interpretation. No, totally. Well, and then there's muddy versions, like there is a theory that what we understand as Robert Johnson, all of those recordings, we have always been hearing them at the wrong speed. We've always been hearing them pitched up.
Oh, interesting.
And someone's taken the recordings and gone like, actually, this is actually the pitch. This is what this would all have been recorded at. And it's different music. His voice is different. It's not a big difference. I forget. It's only a couple of semitones, but it changes the character of his voice, what he was doing, what it means for his guitar playing. Okay, I'm going to step up on a soapbox. I think we are currently in a moment where everybody's driven by certain technologies to make shit decisions. The one we're in right now is because cinema and a lot of prestige television is being made for the cinema and 7.1 surround sound systems. Nobody goes to the theater and nobody has a 7.1 surround sound. So everybody in the world is chasing the volume between the sound effects and music and the dialogue that they can't hear. Everybody's doing it and everybody complains about it and it's not changing. My theory is at some point, all of these movies are going to be, the audio is going to be remastered so you can actually hear the dialogue, and the special effects and music isn't going to be so deafening because nobody likes it. It serves no fucking purpose unless you want to go to a theater and have your eardrums destroyed, right?
Yeah.
I'd say half people I know watch TV with the subtitles on because Dialogue is now incomprehensible. I think it's because of this like unilateral bad decision, like with I'm going to ram everything with a digital limiter on the end and smash the audio so it sounds distorted and exciting. It's exciting.
Yeah.
It's not exciting. It's fatiguing.
It reminds me of,
It's the opposite.
I'm not adding anything to your point, but it reminds me of the few different times I've seen Suspiria.
Yeah.
And it's like radically different sound experience.
Completely.
And like there's one time I saw it, I think maybe at the Roxy, and it was like, it's like listening to like the black metal version of it. It was just so blown out.
It was terrible. Yeah, it was the optical track was sitting in a basement since the early 80s and it sounded like just white noise. It was glorious.
Yeah. It's kind of, I mean, I don't know. Kind of cool, I guess.
I liked it. I loved it.
I wonder how long it'll be before. I mean, people are probably thinking about this, especially small films, but like the experience of like when I watch this film, I'm watching it on a very small screen, my laptop, with really good headphones.
Yep.
So you have like not a great visual experience, but a pretty good audio experience.
Yeah.
David Lynch has talked about that a little bit, about how like, you know, he thinks that there's going to be more of an effort put into sound, but I haven't seen it. I mean, when you think about like the level of detail of sound in this film, like how important sound is to this film, and how like, I mean, I don't know that I can think of a movie that has used sound more effectively than this film.
Yeah,
ever.
It's really smart.
And I mean, what new film is like that? Like sound seems just like you said, just some banter.
Well, the Pitch Perfect movies. Thanks for letting me say that. Also, what we're talking about is that when you're mixing an album, the idea is that you make it sound as perfectly as possible and keep in mind that it is likely to be listened to on earbuds or on the radio back in the day, whatever. You have to assume that people are going to be listening to it in suboptimum circumstances, and that's part of the thinking.
Yeah.
Is that you make it sound so good that it'll translate to a diversity of reproduction devices. And currently cinema is being done at the highest caliber possible with a total disregard for how it will be replicated on an iPhone, a laptop, on earbuds.
It's weird to me though, like they must be making different mixes for different formats, right?
Well, here's
I mean, for example, the cinema release of Gremlins 2 has the film stock burning and interrupting in the film.
Yes.
And the VHS version has the screen going staticky.
Right.
So if that's happening, there should be like...
Well, there should be, but then we get into, I mean, this is really nerdy bullshit that I just barely understand, but there are so many codecs for how video and audio are compressed. And so sometimes the stereo mix for a movie is actually the 7.1 slashed into two speakers, and sometimes it's mixed for stereo. And those two sound entirely different, right? So it all depends on who did what for whom. And then there's the like, if you want 7.1, you need to be using this streaming service through this device, through this device, through this device into this kind of television. And if there's any break in that entire chain, you're listening to something that was 7.1, became stereo, went 7.1 again, went stereo, and was 7.1.
Yeah.
So you're not getting 7.1, you're getting just nonsense, which is, to my mind, it's sort of like 4 dongles plugged one into the other. Like, thank God we've got all these versions of USB and Thunderbolt, and, you know, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't know. I keep hoping that somebody will come out with something like the VR goggles, the Meta goggles or whatever. Like, if they were like $150 and I could watch movies in them, I would be stoked. Like, to be able to have like a large screen with like cool sound, and like if somebody like just said this is how it works, I think that way you don't have to turn your whole house into like a fucking Best Buy, you know, with like your stupid speaker bars and, you know, all your surround sound bullshit.
The eye fatigue is very real.
I've never used them, so I don't know.
It's unfortunate. The part of the VR we were promised in 91 that never came to be is because staring at something that's 2 inches from your eyes sucks.
Yeah, I guess so. I was just thinking of it like replicating an actual VR environment, not just like blasting your eyeballs with light.
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting that this is based on a short story that's based on an H.G. Wells story.
Yeah.
So it's like, again, it's the books are made of books thing from Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, this is so original. Disturbia is such a shitty copy. There's probably somebody out there that like read the H.G. Wells story, saw this in theater and was like, meh.
And there's some kid who watched Disturbia and like wrote a sick short story based on Disturbia.
Yeah, totally. I'm sure there's people out there who, you know, like the Meredith preferring the newer version of the Texas Chainsaw. There's probably somebody out there who like Disturbia is their shit.
Yeah.
You know? And
Grace Kelly sucks.
Grace Kelly sucks. Heteronormative cis white woman.
Oh God.
Like, her life is just incredible though.
So enviable.
I mean, you're from Philadelphia, right? You know, just your family thinks that like being an actress is basically like being a prostitute, and they're like totally not into it. And then all of a sudden, you're like the most famous actress, and then you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to be a princess. Like, cool.
That's basically what's her name did. That grifter who married the British guy.
Oh, Meghan Markle.
Yeah,
pretty much. Except for she wasn't a beloved actress. She was just an actress or actor or whatever we're saying these days.
She was on Suits. Have you seen Suits? It's a TV show.
Yeah, TV.
It's Netflix content.
Yeah. I watched a couple of Netflix movies recently just for like, man, it is so terrible. Like they're just terrible.
It's weird.
Like just things that just don't make any, like something like as simple as the temperature is high, so the windows are open. Like that level of just like baseline logic is just not even a thing for people. Like, and I'm going to spoil this for you and anyone else listening, but in The Boys,
yeah,
there's anybody who's passed the first season knows that Homelander has a breast milk thing.
Yeah,
there's a character that brings them titties out in the new season. There's no explanation of why that character would even know that, like at all. Like there's zero explanation. Like there's no, oh, she got a secret file or so-and-so told her. It's just like a complete, let's just have the scene here. Like totally disconnected, totally stupid. I just don't understand how, like when I'm writing a dumb case study for work, it's internally coherent and completely checked by all kinds of people. This is like multi-million-dollar episodes of TV shows that millions of people are going to see. Like, I just don't understand how that shit's not tidy.
Yeah, well, it just always brings me back to the refrain. It's amazing that anything ever gets made.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this episode before, but the Rob Zombie episode of Joe Rogan, like when Rob Zombie was interviewed, he just said like filmmaking is mostly just trying to figure out how to get the crane out of the mud. You know, like it's just amazing that anything gets made.
Yeah,
at all.
It's amazing that this movie got made. Obviously, Alfred Hitchcock was such a name, but and I'm really bad at remembering numbers, but learning about that set, how much trouble and cost and how much lumber, how much, how many man hours.
Yeah.
It's shocking.
It's like brick.
It's amazing.
I mean, it was something like, it was at the time, I think, the most expensive set ever made.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Like just totally push that boundary. And, it's not as sexy as like, we developed this new technology for Avatar or some nonsense movie.
Yeah.
But like, he did something that kind of nobody had really done before. He took it really, really far. And what's great about it is, even though obviously we're talking a lot about that set, it is so thoughtful. And the amount of labor and thought that went into creating that backdrop for this film is everything.
Yeah. I mean, just there's a lot to it. But like the lighting could be like dialed in to look like exactly how that time of day should have looked.
It's amazing.
In the room. And the other thing I think is pretty interesting is when the camera's moving around, all the shit is on wheels. So like when they're like panning around, like the guy in the wheelchair, the people behind the camera, which it's not like it's like a red or like a tiny little camera. It's a giant fucking camera. And so they have to move the set out so the camera can swing around. And then when the camera swings back, they move all the furniture back. And so there's like,
I love shit like that so
Me
much.
too, man. I mean, it's like the wizardry of theater kids, you know. Like
Yeah.
it's pretty amazing.
Sort of the Baron Munchausen stage plays. Do you remember that very well?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, the thing too is like it's literally like it's movie magic. Like, you know, like in the Nicole Kidman intro sense, like we come to the movies to experience magic.
Oh my God.
There's so much stuff like just so clever. Like, you know, when the dog dies, the camera is always on LB Jeffries' side of the window, except for when the dog is killed, and then the camera is on the other side of the window and it's looking down from a different perspective. Because like and what I've read, that some people's take on it is that that's when the whole community is engaged finally. Like there's this thing that like, and so like you're no longer separated. He's now like this tragedy has now brought everybody out into themselves, which is kind of interesting. Like especially in a post-war film.
Love it.
Like, yeah. Because there is a lot of like dialogue commentary about like alienation early on, and there's a line too where she mentions like, oh, I think you would look really great in a blue flannel suit, which I think is like an allusion to the book Gray Flannel, The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, which was about like 50s conformity, you know. Yeah, it's kind of, so it's like she's like trying to get him to conform, because it really was like you had a bunch of dudes who would just come back from stomping Japanese dudes to death in the Philippines, and now like you got to bring some dude lobster up the building, you know?
Yeah.
And especially in New York, where a lot of people fought, like you would have like an entire society of people who were just on the battlefield together, probably similarly ranked, like not a lot of them stayed in. And now like one guy's a butcher, one guy's a lawyer, one guy's a banker. That's just, you've seen that play out in the early seasons of Mad Men really well, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting that we have these refrains about what these kids need as a war. But it is interesting that like everybody's got a backstory.
Mm-hmm.
But the natural assumption backstory of people who lived before a certain time is that if they're men, they probably saw war.
Yeah.
That's just kind of a given.
I don't know that you need a war. I mean, like I'd say I'm pretty anti-war. I know that you like
love them borders.
You like to see all them people get murdered. But I think you just need something in common. Like, for example, people of our age, like Gen X, we sort of grew up in the soft 90s with like an explosion in culture. Yep. And I think that like the 90s were the first time, I think, where people would be like, oh, I like metal, I like hip hop, I like punk rock, I like ska music too. Like there was like this weird, probably because of MTV and the birth of the internet, like you have this and the general prosperity. You know, I think a lot of Gen X people are pretty, you know, chill, I guess, with each other. Like they don't seem to have, like, I find that people of my age to your age, like, you know, like 40s and 50s, aren't as like culture warring right now. And I think because we had more of a shared culture, it wasn't as fractured by like the internet and all these like weird subcultures and things like that.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I can see that. I mean, it's also just pre-internet.
Yeah, it's
like internet-driven consciousness.
Yeah, yeah.
About how to relate to other people. An internet-based consciousness is necessarily fractured and combative.
Yeah, and it's weird too that like we're kind of all doing what James Stewart's character is doing now. We're all sitting in rooms, looking at other people do things through little screens. You know, which is pretty dark.
Yeah.
Some of us are even solving murders, if the podcast are to be believed.
Totally. So I think, were you going to say something about the clothing?
Well, something I was thinking about is like when an actor has a reputation for being stylish, and then a director makes them stylish. You know, it's like a little bit of a chicken or egg sort of thing. You know, it's like, is this character like? I think Brad Pitt's a great example. Like I don't know that he's considered like a fashion icon, like how Beckham would be, but it seems like people think he's a cool guy because in films he's a cool guy. You know, and I wonder how much of like her society hybriding sort of thing is like enabled via like film choices versus like, I wonder if she felt compelled to like keep that up off the clock. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's very interesting. I feel like I don't want to get into it because I can't remember, but like all the colors of the outfits all had like specific meanings at different points.
Yeah.
Like, but I don't know. I always think about like the clothing of this time, like how much of a pain in the ass it would have been to maintain all this clothing. Like you even see the murderer comes back and he has like the box of laundered shirts. And it's like, God, that would have to be like part of your whole deal. It's like getting your suits maintained.
Oh God. Yeah.
I mean, back then they weren't served. You would have to take it to like the Chinese laundry or whatever they had back then.
And how many were there? And how long did it take?
Yeah.
And how many shirts did you have to have? And where did you keep them all? And
it always blows my mind in these old movies, and it must have some basis in realities. Like, you know, like a traveling salesman would just have like a tiny little suitcase and then like a suit. Like, were you just fucking gross everywhere you went? Or did like the suit sort of like...
And that suitcase doesn't have wheels.
Yeah.
So you're carrying...
Well, back then were men.
That's true.
When Crystal and I first started dating, I had a suitcase. And I was like so resistant to getting a suitcase with wheels. And it was such a fucking thing. Like, it was like, I just had my suitcase that I liked. It was like some old vintage suitcase that I had. And I felt like fucking William Burroughs traveling around with it. And like, I remember we got this huge, like my mom was like, you need to get a suitcase that has wheels on it. I was like, respectfully, I'm not a pussy. I don't need to roll my shit around. I can just carry it like a fucking man.
Weird. Oh God.
It just seemed weird to me. Like that all of a sudden, everybody had to have wheels on their suitcase. Now, obviously, everybody does or whatever.
Yeah.
But
my backpack should have wheels.
But yeah, I was so resistant to a suitcase with wheels for so long. I was like angry about it.
What a strange affectation.
Yeah. And I just like thought it was stupid that everybody was getting so soft that they would have wheels on their suitcase. Like, Jesus Christ. Like, what are we going to wheelchairs next to get ourselves around? It just felt like Wall-E to me, you know? And then I remember like my mom threw my suitcase away. And like and then they went and bought me this like shitty rolling suitcase. I was so fucking mad. I was such a dick about it too. I remember being so angry. For no reason. Just stupid. Like,
well, no, someone threw out something of yours without your consent. That's not cool.
I feel like doing that to society and all of its baggage.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, it's just so wild to me. Like the Reacher, you have a toothbrush.
Yeah,
like we've talked about that before. It's like, how does that even work? Like, you don't like want to wash your face or...
Yeah,
you know?
That must smell terrible.
Yeah, I wonder if like I think I don't like always smell great because I haven't worn deodorant in like 15 years.
Ew.
Yeah, fuck that. Toxins.
You must be toxins. There's toxins. It's not a thing. You must be just lucky that you don't smell bad.
I don't sweat that much.
Yeah. See, I would take 2 showers a day if I could.
Yeah. I'll go like days.
And I think it would be everybody'd be the better for it if I could. Do we have any, what?
Are you like one of those people that would like powder your whole body like Louis XIV if you could?
I probably should.
Like full on Baron Harkonnen.
Not a bad idea.
Yeah, pretty good, pretty good.
Little kids to like blow powder on my back like Morton Joe. That's what I need.
That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, it would. Oh my God, what's happening? Monique Jenkinson, aka Fauxnique, how did you get into our studio?
Oh my gosh, I was just walking by your window.
Have you ever seen the movie Rear Window?
Did you come in through the fire escape?
I did. I came up through the fire escape in my organza new look dress.
What does that even mean?
Well, let me tell you, I'm obsessed with the clothes in this movie. Well, not so obsessed that I actually know who designed them. So we should look that up.
Edith Head.
Edith Head. It is Edith Head. Well, she did the costumes, but she's a costume. She was I guess she designed the costumes and then, but I feel like it might even be a sort of, Miss Kelly's gowns by Christian Dior or something like that. But I don't think so. Maybe not. But amazing. Edith Head. Yes, she's wearing, so Grace Kelly is wearing these incredible, full skirted, full on post-war new look, gorgeous, snatched dresses.
What's snatched?
Snatched. We say snatched when the waist is kind of, corseted in this incredible, beautifully tailored garment. And she's just so charming. I kind of didn't want to, I remember Grace Kelly as being this sort of standard of beauty, kind of oppressive standard of beauty around the home I grew up in.
Sometimes a 10's a 10. You know, a universal 10.
You don't want to love her, and I mean, she's so.
I have no problem with loving her.
She's so charming.
She seems like she was a pretty good person later in
Yeah.
life, and she was super DTF before she got married, according to the rumors.
according to Kiki and Herb. But I love that moment. Of course, this classic moment where she's in this white organza gown, white with flowers on it, with this perfectly pressed, incredible look, and just climbs over that fence. And that is the moment she climbs over the fence, and Jimmy Stewart's character just gets off that fence of wanting to marry her in that moment. He's like, oh, she's up for adventure. She climbs over the fence, up the fire escape, and through the window. In heels, and this flawless gown. And she really carries out the task of getting this evidence, and proves that she is up for an adventure. My friend Carl and I were just at a party when we were talking about this movie, and he was a little skeptical about the relationship between the two of them. And definitely, I agree, there's not a lot of spark, and Jimmy Stewart is way too old for the role and for her. And I think that in a way, there's this sort of perceived, or this, what's the word I'm looking for? This kind of proposed backstory where he's, we never see him on his feet as like a dynamic, war photographer turned journalistic magazine photographer. I mean, you imagine that he was taking photos for this magazine she worked for, and they, fell in love that way. So maybe he was kind of dynamic on his feet in that role. But yeah, the relationship between them, it's a little like there's a lot of backstory we kind of have to buy into.
Yeah, you're right. I never thought of that. That his character in this movie is kind of a whiny little bitch, but we are witnessing someone who went from diving out of the way of explosions to being stuck in a wheelchair for, I think he'd already been in the wheelchair for 3 weeks, a month.
6 weeks, and he has 2 more to go. Or maybe, 6 weeks, and he has one more week to go. 1 more week to go. That's right.
So I guess it's fair we can't judge his character based on this movie, which is odd as far as what people who already know him might have seen in him outside of the window we get into his character in this movie.
Yes. So it's all set out for us. It's like a little suspension of disbelief somehow. I don't know if you've talked about this yet in the conversation, but it's about marriage. And it's sort of this deft and interesting look at the 1950s cultural expectations around marriage, around what men are supposed to do, what women are supposed to do. And she does have this, okay, she's been working at her cute magazine, and now it's time to settle down and get married. And then he also, everyone is kind of bugging him to settle down and get married. And then there are all these views through the window, the guy who kills his wife. We have this nagging wife character, and there are a few little jokes where, Jimmy Stewart is like, oh, I'm right about not wanting to get married kind of thing, like looking at the nagging wife. And then you have the hot ballerina who's dating all the guys, and she's kind of doing her own. There's a sort of dating and marriage story in there. And then we have Miss Lonely Hearts and her, desperately wanting to meet someone. And of course, a lot of cliched 1950s ideas of what women are supposed to do and what women are supposed to be, but also a sort of interesting look. It doesn't feel super prescriptive somehow. I was surprised by how kind of fresh and philosophical it felt to me, instead of, oh, here's the happy ending and what's supposed to happen.
I just remembered something.
Yeah.
Which I had to look at real quick. The romance is based on a real romance. The war photographer Robert Capra had an affair with Ingrid Bergman, and they were only a couple years apart. But that's what this relationship is based on. So, and that was in the air a little bit. It was sort of like a Hollywood romance rumor. And I think that people who saw this film when it was released would have known about that affair and would have probably ported a little bit of that relationship into this.
More about the clothes. Well, I love how she's in her dungarees at the end, her little loafers and her
She's ready for action.
chic dungarees. She's ready for action. And then she, she's reading about, what is she reading about? Kathmandu or something. And then she secretly gets at her fashion magazine. But she's going to be fine. She'll be fine in Nepal. I think it's Nepal where what she's reading about. Like, yeah, she'll do great. She'll charm everyone. Let's see what else. Oh, the negligee moment. We both were commenting on how her risque negligee, when she slips into something more comfortable, like she's more covered up than in her fabulous strapless number she's wearing before she.
It's just coded as like revealing sexy because it's lingerie, but it actually covers more of her body than the thing she changed out of.
Because but it is a nightgown. It's not even lingerie. It's a nightgown. It's a peignoir set is what they were called, which is like a nightgown and a robe that match. But that whole risque, wonderful thing of it fitting in her little train case. And her little train case, like, see, I can travel light. I love that. I'd love to see her with that going, mountaineering.
I imagine she'd have a bunch of Sherpas carrying all of her shit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And why wouldn't she?
Yeah,
I bet he would too. I mean, come on.
Yeah, he's got equipment. Like it wasn't like he was rolling around with like a little camera.
Well, and it's before there was wheelie luggage, Chad.
Yeah, fuck that. That's the decline of civilization.
Wheelie luggage?
Yeah.
Oh, I love my wheelie luggage. Did you talk about Thelma Ritter?
A little bit.
A little.
Yeah.
Probably not as deftly as you could.
Oh my God. She's so cute. Again, she's so cute and so charming. That is a role she played. Definitely in All About Eve, she plays a version of that role. And I feel like there are other films in which she plays that role. I haven't done a deep dive on Thelma Ritter, but she has such great moments in this film. And her clothes are great. And her body looks fabulous. Seeing her in black and white and kind of she's usually like in the dumpy house dress or whatever. But I love how she and Lisa are kind of, they have this like Scooby-Doo
I totally
moment.
was going to mention Scooby-Doo earlier. I completely forgot about it. Like it's super Scooby-Doo, like the way it...
Wait, how so? What?
In Scooby-Doo, there would be times when like Thelma and Daphne would go off and have an A adventure, and there'd be like the B adventure.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. Very Thelma and Daphne, like deciding to taking matters into their own hands. And of course, the whole premise of this is that like the man is laid up. So the women have to
do the labor.
do all the labor, including the solving of crimes and the taking of risks. So I wonder if it's a little bit of does it feel, I mean, that felt like a little, again, kind of deft because it's not making any particular, I mean, the point is like sisters are doing it for themselves.
I mean, to me, they're just like capable characters.
Well, their sisters are doing it for their
boss.
their man. Yeah. Yeah.
The patriarch. Sisters are doing it for the patriarch.
The patriarch. Does he feel like a patriarch? Sisters are doing.
Well, he's paying Stella, and as soon as she marries him, her sense of agency in her life is going to plummet tremendously.
Lisa.
Even though she's richer, she probably, in a certain sense, has a lot of agency. But
somebody's got to warm up that brandy.
So weird. It's such a weird detail in this movie.
I love it.
Some of the lines that she has are good, like when she talks about like the Miss Torsos juggling wolves. I think that's such a good line. And then the later when they're talking about like just not really wanting to get into like rear window ethics, I think is a cool line too.
Yes. And does this feel like how when we were all bored during COVID, people just gossiped about each other on the internet incessantly? Like we were all peering into our own little rear windows. Like we're all carrying our little rear windows around in our pockets now.
Yes. And getting into people's business that is not our own.
But to the point, though, he's right to get into this business.
I don't think he was right to get into the business. I think it was accidental that his nonsense turned out to be in line with reality. I think he was a Steve Bannon of crime solving, the stopped clock that's right twice a day.
I don't think that he I guess what I would say is I don't think he was actively heroic by doing it, but I think he was just passively creepy. I don't think it was, and it just, and it just worked out.
Yeah, I love this thing of marriage though that keeps coming up. It is about anxiety. This film is really about anxiety around marriage.
Yeah, he has that whole little monologue where he talks about just the incessant noises of the home, like the laundry machine and the dishwasher and going on. And that's basically my whole life now. And I love it.
House husband.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just feel like it's one of those things, you should be so lucky to have a fucking laundry machine.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, we have neither of those things.
I know.
You guys still out on the laundromats?
Going to the laundromat, getting my coffee, going to the laundromat. Or, well, I mean, we also send it down. But also thinking about and then there's the newlyweds. So everyone they see through the window, has their own kind of marriage story. They have their marriage story. And then even the thing about the obsession with marriage extending to the clue, a woman would never leave without her wedding ring.
Well, it's also in line with that. The movie basically starts with, you see some newlyweds. He carries her through the threshold. They close the curtains or the blinds or whatever, and then we kind of don't see them for most of the rest of the movie.
Right. Well, the window opens up and it's he's had his balls completely drained and he's leaning out trying to get a breather from his insatiable new wife.
See, I actually read it as he's actually miserable and already over it. He's just fucking done. I don't know. Watch that scene again. The next time you see him, it looks like, this is another representation of marriage is about being nagged at by women.
See, he looked dehydrated in the way that fornication can dehydrate one, is what I was thinking.
Or whatever.
Yeah, and this is 20 years before Gatorade.
I also, the other character, I love that we're in the West Village. Greenwich Village, before it was the West Village, because we never spoke of the East Village. So it was the only village to speak of. And it was the bohemian, he is obviously a bohemian artist or a bohemian, journalist living in this bohemian artist's Melrose Place building.
They have the woman who's the sculptor.
Love the sculptress. I was just going to say that. I love the sculptress.
The hunger statue that just has an empty stomach.
So good. She's so good. Yeah, and her design is great. She kind of looks like Edith. Edith Head kind of designed her to look like her. Look a little bit with the bangs and glasses and the. Yeah, she's amazing. And the little dog.
Whatever. It dies, it gets replaced.
I was wondering.
It gets replaced. Oh, harsh. Just replaced and named the same thing, right? I don't remember. Maybe not.
Do you think the dog in the basket had any sort of influence on Silence of the Lambs?
Maybe. Could be. Yeah. Sure. I think there are influences for things all over the place.
Yeah. That dog was also in The Burbs. The dog that's precious.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
The same dog?
Same dog,
That's a great piece of trivia.
Pretty sick.
This dog was cuter.
I don't remember what kind of dog is it?
I think it's some kind of terrier. Yeah, like a little Cairn Terrier or a little Yorkie.
I guess a certain amount of our audience, this would make sense too, but the flashbulb scene at the end reminded me of y'all's show.
Oh, yeah.
With the flashbulbs.
Thank you. Yeah. I love the use of the flashbulbs. That was really, I love that scene.
Very smart.
There's no way that would have stopped me from killing him like this.
Right. I wonder if Mythbusters ran that through.
We can do it. We can bust that myth right now. I'm gonna come at you. I'm just gonna come at you. You just flash your iPhone at me and see how much it deters
different.
me.
That's different from flashbulbs in the dark.
That whole sequence is a mess. Everything about it's a mess. When the cops show up and they're like, "Throw me the 38." No one on earth would throw a revolver up to a window so that they could shoot across.
Oh my God. Yeah. Am I forgetting? I mean, do we need to catalyze? I think really she has 3 outfits, right? 4 outfits. because it takes place over only a couple of days.
She's got the society outfit with the white gloves.
Yes,
She's got the green outfit with the hat and the veil. She's that's the best outfit.
Oh my God, that green suit with her that cream colored like sort of silk halter top.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that suit is to die. Amazing. Yes.
And the jeans, which you mentioned.
Just something to kind of run around in at your magazine shop.
I thought jeans were like kind of a later thing. Because there's the Misfits, right? Kind of made it sort of popular.
I think so. I think jeans.
I mean, this might have contributed to jeans being on the map in a sense to like be more approachable and less like this is just for the working class, right?
Mm.
Could have been.
Right. Well, and the Misfits was 62 or something. 61?
I thought the Misfits is early. Hold on.
Misfits is a little earlier, Marilyn. And then who else wears a dungaree? I mean, I also feel like
61 Misfits.
61, I was right. I feel like there's something in there with some jeans. Well, Rebel Without a Cause for men, but like jeans for women. Yeah, her wearing jeans would almost be like a fashiony woman being in like, you know, ripstop cargo pants and hiking boots probably today. You know, compared to everything else she's wearing, that was that scene, her in that outfit probably got a laugh.
Yeah, I can see that.
If what she's expected to wear is these incredible, completely tailored and beautiful things to work, and her pajama set is like basically a couture gown that her wearing she's wearing a little like sleeveless shirt kind of tied Ellie Mae Clampett style, and then some dungarees and loafers.
Oh, well,
maybe girls would wear them to college. I think at this point, if you were, you know, they were, well, beatniks. I'm trying to think of when this is in the history of, I'm thinking about the articles of interest, history of jeans and history of preppy whole arc that I listened to. And yeah, I think college students wore pants, probably not even jeans. And like women wearing pants was available to college girls. That was where it was acceptable.
So this article from womensagenda.com, so you know it's legit, says Lady Levi's were designed in 1934. Yeah. These are the first women's jeans. Oh, wow. And that it says that the Misfits was the breaking point for women's jeans. After that, it was on.
Interesting. Yeah. It would have really been like Western wear.
Yeah, the article also mentions like Western films is when you saw them.
Western films, but like for apparel for women in the world, it would probably jeans for women in 1939 would have been like if you worked on if you're working on a ranch, if you're living on a ranch, if you're riding horses, being with horses, or going to trek with your journalist boyfriend.
You think they went on to solve more capers? Like that could be the sequel.
That's Rear Window 2, :
Rear Window 2, Kathmandu.
Fuck.
Yeah.
Fuck.
See? There it is.
God, that took a while.
I also love that Miss Torso has the Nebuchadnezzar boyfriend at the end.
Yeah.
It's so cute.
He's a Catman don't.
Do you have anything to say about Miss Torso's dancing?
I loved it. She was charming. She was great. She was actually, you can tell she's a real dancer. Because a lot of times ballet dancers are, when people are doing, actresses trying to ballet dance. Well, you can tell it didn't need to be a famous actress, so they just hired a dancer. And she's a real dancer. And she's great. Yeah, I have no notes.
And so this is certainly male gaze-ish of me, but she seemed a little thick for a ballet dancer. Was it just different back then? Because I associate like ballet now with just like wasted away people,
She was a little hubba for a ballet dancer.
I'm totally into it, but.
I mean, she's obviously ballet trained. It might have been a ballet dancer, but they were allowed to be curvy in the 50s in a way that they stopped being allowed to be curvy in the 60s, kind of when models stopped being allowed to be curvy. But then it was also this choreographer, George Balanchine, kind of brought he loved a skinny ballerina. And he was already doing things in the 50s, but that aesthetic definitely took hold and hasn't really let go. Yeah.
Thank you for visiting.
So fun to be here. Thanks, you guys.
Do we have anything else to say about Rear Window?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like you could just talk about micro scenes in this movie forever.
Yeah.
You know, there's just, I mean, probably 30 books on Amazon about this movie alone, you know, and like an infinite number of film master's theses about it.
Yeah.
But not so much anymore. It seems like even though this movie is, you know, on the AFI list and it's like in the National Museum and whatnot, I haven't heard anybody recently talk about it. Like this is the Harold Bloom thing. It's like, you know, people are so happy to tear up the canon, you know, like I don't know, what do you
Good luck to them.
instead of this? She's Got Game or whatever. Like what is 12 Years a Slave? Like, I mean, we got to remember any of these prestige DEI movies down the road? Probably not, you know.
It's a very good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what have you seen recently that you think people will be having conversations about 75 years from now? Like in the last 15 years.
Arrival.
You think so?
It's incredible.
I love it. I think it's probably...
Every time I watch it, I get lots of new stuff from it.
Have you read the short story?
I have.
Okay. I think Ted Chiang is probably the best sci-fi writer living. Like,
totally.
I'm
in awe of, I can't believe how good his writing is.
His writing is just absolutely fucking incredible. I mean, just to read it is an absolute pleasure. And you're like, where are these ideas coming? I mean, everything about it's really impressive. I think in Arrival, like the acting is so good.
Yep.
Like the memes are so good. Like that space drugs with the sign is so funny. I think the alien calligraphy of the language, the way it's represented is super cool.
Yep.
The aliens are completely alien.
Yep.
It's heartbreaking, the whole thing.
Yeah. I don't think filmmaking ever gets better than Arrival.
But here's the thing about Arrival, though. You could look at Rear Window and be like, we're seeing shots and camera movement that has never been seen before. It's like real Leni Riefenstahl type shit, you know?
True.
I don't think Arrival has that.
That's fair.
At all.
That's
you know,
fair.
And I just, you know, like that.
I mean, that doesn't have to be a necessity on the
not at all
meter.
But
point taken.
Something I think about a lot is how you talk about how like music's just not new anymore because we like stopped hearing new sounds since they invented the saw wave or whatever it was. I don't mean to dismiss it. That's just I'm at the limit of my ability to remember.
That's not what I said, but close enough.
Well, what did you say? Like,
some would argue with me here, but part of the issue of why contemporary music is that humanity went through a period in the 20th century of continuously hearing sounds that no human in the history of humanity had ever heard before. Mm-hmm. No human had ever heard a synthesizer, a pure sine wave, had ever heard anything go through a formant filter, had ever heard ring modulation, have ever heard effects that can be done with reverb. The last, slightly arguable, but the last sound technology that can be said for was autotune. Mm-hmm. No one had ever heard that before. That was the first time in humanity. And there has been nothing since then. And that's not even a very good one. That's a very limited use technology. And so I think a big part of the reason why the hand has been forced into retromania, that the reason why the majority of music that everybody listens to now sounds pretty much exactly like it could have been made 40 years ago, except for some production techniques that are variations on style that aren't very substantial, is because the technology has not developed to the technology has made music making more democratic, has made it faster, but it has not invented anything that has changed the palette at all.
I was thinking about this. Like, you could maybe make an argument that, you know, you get film, then you get television, but I don't think television has looked back to improve film in any way other than like playing with like length. Like, you know, like in a way The Wire is like a 30-hour movie.
Sure.
You know, but that's really just like the form of the narrative, it's really not improved in any way from like a film perspective. Like there's not.
Yeah.
And
That's the difference between a short story and a novel. It's not.
Yeah.
It can change the style, but it doesn't inherently do so.
Yeah, and I was thinking about like like the whole Hitchcock thing that film is just the juxtaposition of images with sound connecting them and all that, all that stuff. And you see it a lot in this movie, which is the face looking, you see the thing, face reaction.
Yeah.
You see that. And I was thinking about like how what might be similar to that but different is like reaction videos where you see the person's face while they're watching the thing. So like imagine like almost like an overlay or a split screen where you're seeing him look at it and you're also seeing it and he's like reacting to it at the same time. I don't think it would have the same punch. But there's something else that happens. There's almost like a parasympathetic thing where if like somebody's like laughing really hard at a clip, sometimes the clip is funnier because the person in the foreground is laughing super hard at it. Sometimes.
It's kind of the laugh track effect, right?
Yeah.
Is Monty Python funnier because the laugh track is so loud?
I mean, probably. Like I feel like you have mirror neurons, that make you like do a thing that like you see somebody yawn, you yawn. I'm sure it has some psychological effect.
Yes.
There'll probably be like, like Rick and Morty, he makes the noise. He's like, ah! And then all of a sudden everybody's like paralyzed and hypnotized. There'll probably be something like that invented that just has a terrifying psychological effect on people that is so uncanny and jarring that it gets used. Like there'll be something that just allows people to be super angry looking at a screen, like total 1984, 2 minutes of hate sort of thing.
Right. Could happen. I don't know.
Either that or the sexualization of the popcorn bucket will really be driving.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I guess that's it.
All right.
If you had to stick your dick into a rear window themed popcorn bucket, what would you want it to look like?
Thanks for listening.
That keyboard is so fucking loud.
It's the best. Nobody has to hear it but me, so.
It sounds like something from like Time Bandits.